The stack of license renewal files was still warm from the printer when Marcus Brecht leaned back in his chair, smirking like he'd just solved world hunger. "Lena will handle it while you're gone," he said, waving toward his new assistant like she was the second coming of logistics expertise. "My name's Thomas Grayson, Senior Compliance Manager at Nordaxis Transport Group, 22 years into a career that's seen more directors come and go than I can count. I'm in my late 40s, and this wasn't just another line item on a to-do list. This was the EU Freight Operations License Renewal. Without it, every truck in the region would be stuck at the border, costing us roughly $100,000 a day. I'd already cleared my calendar for a 2-week trip to Boston to see my son Ethan. Flights booked, hotel paid. First proper break in years. I had the entire process prepped, and all Marcus had to do was let me finish it before I left. But Marcus wasn't interested in smooth operations, he wanted to make a point. Lena was bright sure, but she didn't even know the renewal portal password yet. Handing her this process was like giving someone the cockpit keys mid-flight and telling them to figure it out. Before I tell you what I did next, do me a favor, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had a boss cancel something important in your life just to prove they could. I walked out of his office with a straight face, but inside I was already playing the long game. Compliance work is a strange beast. From the outside, it looks like forms and emails. On the inside, it's deadlines, regulations, and clockwork precision. Miss one piece and the whole machine seizes. Marcus had just pulled out a gear, and he didn't even know it. So, no, I didn't need to sabotage anything. I just had to let things run their course. And as I stepped onto that plane to Boston, I already knew the clock was ticking. Because Marcus had just set a $2 million timer, and I was the only one who could hear it start. I'll rewind 1 week before my flight to Boston. Marcus Brecht had been in the building for all of 10 business days and was already calling me the legacy guy. At Nordaxis Transport Group, legacy means 2 things you know, where the landmines are, and you're expensive. Experience is only celebrated until a new director needs a shortcut. That shortcut came during the Monday stand-up. Marcus assigned the EU license renewal to his assistant, Lena Vogel, who'd been here less than 3 months. No background in compliance, no customs contacts, not even clearance in the licensing system. He didn't look at me when he said, it just moved on to the next bullet. After the stand-up, he sent it in writing, "Subject streamlining EU renewals. Effective immediately, Lena will own the EU license renewal. Tom, provide materials as requested." I filed it in a folder labeled Delegation, Brecht, Paper First Arguments later. That afternoon, David Kruger from the customs office sent the first reminder. He listed Form C-19, that's the Customs Security Attestation, plus our inspection schedule and a notarized compliance signature. Without those, the application sits in limbo, and border agents start flagging freight. His second email said COB, which just means close of business, and the fines start right after that. In Slack, I pinged Lena a courtesy note, uploaded prior year's packets for reference. Watch the C-19 and the notarized signature, those stalled approvals. She reacted with a quick thumbs up. No follow-up. By Thursday, David's tone had shifted to urgent. "That's regulator speak for, we've started the clock." Marcus brushed it off in the hallway, "She's learning. Don't hover." I smiled and walked away. Some battles are won by letting the other side step on their own tripwire. That Saturday before my flight, I came in to check the renewal workspace. No notarized docs. The inspection schedule was half blank. Placeholders like TBD Monday. Monday was the submission cutoff. I've watched one missing signature turn into trucks parked at the border and a finance call where every minute sounds like money leaving the room. I copied the workspace to my own drive. Date stamps, file versions, missing attachments, all preserved. Then I locked my office, left the building, and said nothing. By Monday morning, I was already in transit to Boston. My phone buzzed with a group email from David application, incomplete, cannot process, without notarized C-19 and inspection schedule. Marcus replied, "All Tom, can you advise Lena?" I didn't answer. I was somewhere over the Atlantic, and Lena's name was the only one on the regulator's recipient list. The next day, the second regulator notice landed, this one, copied to Robert Kessler, our CFO. It included the penalty schedule, $25,000 per day per shipment, starting Friday at 4 Oyster p.m., Berlin time. 4 shipments were already queued for customs that week. That evening, Robert called my cell. "I'm looking at an email that says, we're about to eat $2 million. What am I missing? I told him to check the delegation memo. Silence for a beat. Then, you have that in writing. I told him I did and that he might want to save a copy. By Friday at 4:00 p.m., Berlin time, the regulator would stop asking and start penalizing. And I already had the email trail that would put Marcus's name on the bill. I was still at my desk when Lena appeared in the doorway holding a manila folder like it was a dead fish. Marcus says you're to hand over all renewal files, she said, avoiding my eyes. No explanation, no discussion. Just that. I opened the folder. Inside were 3 printed templates, generic Word docs with placeholders for client name, address, and license number. Templates. As if 22 years of knowing every clause, every customs officer, every unspoken deadline could be boiled down to a few Word files. I asked her who'd be handling the renewal. She hesitated. Me, I guess. Marcus said it's just paperwork. Right, I said. Just paperwork. Marcus's office door was ajar. I could see him leaning back in his chair, tapping a pen against his teeth. I stepped inside. If you're reassigning the C-19 renewal, at least make sure Lena has the portal login. He smiled the kind of smile that's really a dismissal. She'll figure it out. That's what training is for. I knew exactly what he was doing. The C-19 form wasn't just an annual checkbox, it was the license that let Nordaxis move freight through 3 European ports without delay. Missed the renewal window, and every shipment in those lanes froze until customs cleared us again. That could mean €2 million tied up on the water. It wasn't just about a missed form or a frozen shipment. If this stuck to me, it would erase 22 years of building a name I could sign my son's future on. 2 days later, I saw the first red flag in the customs portal, a pending status on our Hamburg lane. I checked the submission log. No new C-19 had been filed. I sent Lena a Slack message, reminder, C-19 deadline is next week. Customs officer is David Kruger. Call him directly. She reacted with a quick thumbs up. No follow-up. By Friday, I could see the trap snapping shut. An internal memo from compliance landed in my inbox, CC'd to Marcus Hamburg Lane, flagged for license non-renewal. Please confirm responsible party. Marcus thought he was playing chess. He hadn't realized I'd been setting the board for 22 years. I already had the email trail, the portal logs, and a notarized record of when I'd handed off the renewal. I closed my laptop for the weekend, knowing one thing. When the freeze hit, Marcus wouldn't just be explaining a late form, he'd be explaining a multi-million euro delay to the board. And that's when my real move would land. Monday morning, I walked in expecting the silence you get when people know something you don't. Instead, it was worse, the hum of keyboards, the low murmur of phone calls, all too normal. It meant the freeze hadn't hit yet. Marcus was at the espresso machine, telling a loud story about a golf game with one of the regional directors. He didn't acknowledge me. I didn't acknowledge him. I checked the customs portal before even taking off my coat. Hamburg Lane status still pending, but now highlighted in yellow. That meant the automated reminder had gone out to the license holder, and since Lena had never updated the portal, the license holder was still me. By 9:15, an email landed. Subject: urgent Hamburg Lane board alert. The body was short. Meeting at 11:00. Bring renewal documentation. CC Marcus Compliance Legal. At 10:50, I walked into the glass conference room. The board secretary Agnes was already setting up the video link to our Zurich headquarters. Marcus sat across from me, tapping on his phone like he was too busy to be nervous. The chair's face filled the big screen. Mr. Grayson, he began, why have we received notice of a pending freeze on our Hamburg operations? Marcus leaned forward, ready to pounce. If I may, the renewal process was delegated to. I held up a hand. With respect, Chair, may I share my screen? A nod. I connected my laptop, pulled up the Slack log. January 12th, onus online. 14, instruction to Lena Vogel to complete renewal. January 12th, OELs. 15, thumbs up acknowledgement. January 13th, follow-up reminder with customs officers direct contact, no action taken. I switched to the audit log, January 12th, 09, a 17 Marcus Brecht, changed access credentials for C-19 portal, removing my account. The chair's face didn't change, but I saw 2 board members glance at each other. Marcus spoke up, his voice quick. That's inaccurate. Compliance can confirm I said that the account change was approved from his credentials. Silence. Only the faint hum of the projector. The chair spoke again. Mr. Brecht, is this correct? Marcus shifted in his seat. I was streamlining responsibilities. I almost smiled. Streamlining. That was one way to describe cutting the brake lines on a truck and handing someone else the keys. The chair leaned back. We'll adjourn for 10 minutes. Outside, I stood by the window overlooking the street. My phone buzzed. Lena, Tom. I didn't know this was a big deal. I thought Marcus had it covered. I typed back, "That's what he wanted you to think." When the meeting resumed, the chair didn't waste time. Mr. Grayson maintained oversight of Hamburg renewal until resolved. Mr. Brecht, we will review your procedural conduct separately. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Walking out, I could feel it the shift. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. The board had seen the first crack in Marcus's armor, and once a crack shows you don't patch it, you widen it until the whole structure comes down. The Hamburg lane was just the opening move. Marcus didn't know I had a much bigger file, one that could turn his streamlining into a career-ending audit. Marcus's voice on the call was too smooth, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed in front of the mirror. "We'll need to expedite the restructuring of oversight on the Hamburg compliance review," he said, which was his polished way of telling me I'd been cut out. He didn't know Lena had forwarded me the internal vendor memos that morning, memos showing he'd bypassed 3 mandatory EU compliance checks to push through an unvetted supplier. That kind of breach wasn't just sloppy. It was the sort of thing that made regulators salivate. I packaged the evidence into a secure link, flagged it for priority review, and sent it to Agnes, the board secretary, with a short note relevant for today's session. No accusations, no commentary, just the kind of quiet delivery that makes people wonder how much more you might be holding. At 3:17 p.m., a reply came from the chair. Understood. We'll handle this discreetly. 15 minutes later, Marcus's calendar went into lockdown mode. No visible meetings, no shared availability. Panic was good. Panic meant the trap was working. But panic also meant danger. Lena pinged me. "He's looking for a scapegoat." The words hit harder than I expected. I'd seen reputations destroyed in this company over less, and the idea of my name being paraded through compliance as the fall guy wasn't just a career risk, it was a lifetime stain. I caught my own reflection in the darkened glass of my office door. Was I ready to see this through if it meant burning every bridge here? If you've ever been cornered like that, forced to choose between staying quiet or fighting back, you'll know exactly what was going through my head. Marcus didn't wait long to make his move. An email from his office landed at 4:52 p.m. Subject line, transition of oversight. The body was 3 sentences, polite but lethal. Effective immediately, my role in Hamburg would be reassigned to better align resources with strategic priorities. He'd CC'd half the senior leadership. I replied with a single sentence. Noted, please ensure the transition includes all compliance documentation for board review. It looked like cooperation. In reality, it was a knife he'd have to twist himself. Minutes later, Lena sent another message. "He's telling people you greenlit the supplier." That was the opening I'd been waiting for. If Marcus wanted to tie my name to his breach, then the record would need to show exactly who had signed off. I pulled the signature logs, export stamped them, and forwarded them to Agnes with the subject line, sign-off record for Hamburg supplier. It showed one name, one date, Marcus Brecht, no legal countersign. No wiggle room, no plausible deniability. I wish I could say I felt relief, but the truth was I felt the weight settle heavier. Marcus's scapegoat plan was already in motion, and it had my name on it. Marcus's tone over the phone was brisk, like he'd already decided my worth before I picked up. "Tom, the board will want an update next week. Keep it brief." Translation: leave out anything that makes him look bad. I jotted the note on the corner of my desk calendar, the same one Ethan had given me last Christmas with the Boston skyline. I'd kept it there for months, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of why I'd been willing to put up with this nonsense in the first place. On Slack, Robert Kessler sent me a discreet ping. "Heads up, Elaine is already asking why the renewal isn't in the system. She's not buying the delays answer. If the board chair was pressing him, then Marcus's window to spin the story was closing." I typed back, "She'll have proof soon enough." Robert didn't reply, but I imagined the faint smirk he'd wear in the next meeting. The real shift came when Agnes Meyer, the board secretary, called me directly. Agnes never wasted words. "Thomas, I'm updating the pre-read packet. I noticed your name missing from the license correspondence. Is that correct?" I told her yes. She paused. "That's unusual." Her voice stayed neutral, but I could tell she was filing it away. Agnes missed nothing. Later that afternoon, David Kruger sent another polite but pointed email. Reminder license C19 renewal required notarized signature by Friday. Current file incomplete. I forwarded it to Marcus and Lena with a single line. This is the fourth reminder. Lena reacted with the same thumbs up emoji she'd used before, no follow-up. It was almost impressive how quickly she'd learned Marcus's habit of acknowledging problems without solving them. By Thursday, I had what I needed: a complete timeline of Marcus's handoffs, Lena's non-responses, and every customs reminder in between. Laying them out side by side, it was obvious that this wasn't just incompetence, it was a pattern the board would recognize instantly. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the Boston skyline calendar still in view, flipping through the printouts. My stomach felt heavy, not from the wine, but from the knowledge that once I moved forward, there was no coming back. You tell yourself you're ready for the fallout, but there's always that quiet part of you that wonders, if you're about to cross a line, you can't uncross. The next morning, I slipped the packet into a plain manila folder, the kind that blends into a stack on any boardroom table, until someone opens it and realizes the meeting just changed. When I handed it to Agnes before the session, she didn't ask what was inside. She just nodded once like she already knew. And as I watched Marcus take his seat completely unaware of what was about to land in front of him, I couldn't help but wonder, would this be enough to finally break his grip? Or was I about to find out just how far he'd go to keep it? Marcus didn't look up when I stepped into the 11th floor conference room, the one with the glass wall that made every conversation feel like it had an audience. He was scrolling through his phone, thumb moving slow, deliberate. The Boston skyline calendar hung crooked behind him, the page still on last month. That kind of neglect told me more about his state of mind than any meeting agenda ever could. "Tom," he said, still not looking up. "Sit." I stayed standing. "Where's the procurement audit file?" He gave a lazy shrug. "You mean the one that was full of outdated numbers and bad vendor data?" His voice was soft enough to be plausible if someone walked by, but the smirk under it was sharp. Gone. It wasn't the kind of gone you fix with an IT restore. I knew because Lena Vogel had already told me quietly in the elevator that morning that she'd seen Marcus delete it himself. Yesterday morning, she'd said, glancing at the security camera in the corner. He called it redundant. I froze. Moments like this make you wonder if someone in your office pulled a stunt like this. Would you fight back or keep your head down? I'd like to hear what you'd do. Drop it in the comments so I know I'm not the only one who's been here. I didn't thank her. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because drawing a line between us now would put her in his sights. I'd seen Marcus destroy people with less. Robert Kessler from Legal was already in the room flipping through a slim folder, like he was checking if the last page was still there. His eyes flicked up at me, then away. He knew something, but Robert's loyalty was to the company, not to me. Elaine Moritz, our CFO, sat beside him, her hands folded tight. Elaine could make or break a board meeting, and right now, she looked like she was calculating which side of the table would still have power when this was over. Agnes Meyer, the board secretary, slipped in last. She didn't speak, just took her seat and started writing. Agnes wrote everything down, even the pauses, especially the pauses. Marcus leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "The board's going to want answers, Tom. And if you can't produce a file that proves your numbers well..." He let the rest hang, smiling like a man watching his opponent's clock run out. I remembered something my father told me years ago when I was still learning, that office politics could be more dangerous than the work itself. Don't ever let someone else set the clock. "I can produce the numbers," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just not the way you expect." His smile faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it, and so did Agnes. She wrote something in the margin of her notebook. The truth was, I'd been building a second set of audit trails for months, ever since Marcus started pushing deals through without standard vendor compliance checks. I'd kept them off the main server, logged through a private vendor portal that was still under my control. What Marcus didn't know was that those files had timestamps, access logs, and vendor email confirmations, all perfectly compliant and outside his reach. I glanced at Elaine. "When's the board session?" "This Friday," she said, her voice giving away nothing. That gave me 3 days. Not to find the file I already had, but to make sure the version I showed on Friday couldn't be twisted, discredited, or conveniently misplaced. The meeting broke without a clear resolution, which was exactly how Marcus wanted it. He thrived on the gray space between decisions, the room where rumors grew. But as I walked out past the crooked calendar and his untouched coffee, I knew the balance had shifted. Because on Friday, Marcus wouldn't be the one controlling the narrative. I would. Friday's board session at Kessler Group wasn't going to be the smooth, pre-scripted takedown Marcus probably envisioned. I'd made sure of that before lunch. The vendor compliance portal had a bug one I'd found weeks ago that froze any file deletions if they were linked to a flagged transaction. It was meant for fraud prevention. Today, it was my shield. I ran the final upload at 11:42 a.m., attaching the audit trail in PDF form to the compliance archive with legal CC'd on the automated notice. It hit every executive inbox in under 30 seconds. Marcus's included. He might as well have put my name in neon next to it. The files weren't just proof they were my insurance policy, the one thing he couldn't rewrite or spin. Every line item, every timestamp, every backdated change he thought would vanish was locked under our retention policy. There was no erasing it without triggering a full system investigation. I shut my laptop and left before the first Slack ping hit. In the parking garage, the air felt heavier than usual, that stale mix of exhaust and rain-soaked concrete. I spotted Elaine leaving with Robert, one of the senior board members she usually avoided outside of meetings. Their voices carried low deliberate. They didn't see me, but I saw enough to know tomorrow's session wasn't going to be routine. This stopped being about Marcus weeks ago. He's just the symptom. The real target is the disease that let him operate unchecked. Revenge plans are easy to talk about when they're still theoretical. But once you hold the match, you have to live with the fire. You start. When I got home, I poured a drink and stared at my phone. I could text Lena she'd want to know it was in motion, but silence felt safer. The fewer people who could predict my next move, the better. I thought about the first time I considered taking Marcus down back when his smugness was just an irritant, not a threat. That was before I understood how deep his reach went. Tomorrow when the board logs in, they'll see every document I tagged. They'll ask questions. They'll find the threads I've been lining up for months. And when they start pulling, they won't just find Marcus. They'll find everyone who gave him cover. Marcus didn't look at me when I walked into the conference room. He was already seated, jacket off sleeves, rolled up like he wanted to signal he was here to work, not posture. Robert sat across from him, an untouched coffee cooling beside his legal pad. Elaine had taken the far end of the table, angled slightly away laptop, open but screen dark. That was her tell. She was here to witness, not participate. I slid into the empty chair next to Robert without speaking. Let Marcus set the tone. He cleared his throat, leaned back, and started in about project delays and vendor bottlenecks, like this was just a status check. The words bounced off me. I'd heard this setup before, the small talk meant to frame his version as the official record. Robert waited until Marcus paused for a sip of water, then reached into his folder and slid a single sheet across the table. "You've seen this before, Marcus." His voice was low even. "Retention protocol notice. Dated 6 months ago. Signed by you." Marcus didn't touch it. "I sign a lot of things." "Sure," Robert said. "But this one means every audit trail from that vendor payment freeze you ordered last quarter is preserved and reviewable. We've got the PDF complete with your approvals, timestamps, and commentary." I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just kept my eyes on Marcus as he shifted in his seat. His cologne sharp synthetic reached me across the table. I remembered hating that scent in smaller rooms. Today it smelled like leverage. "This is a misunderstanding." He tried glancing at Elaine for backup. She didn't look up. Robert leaned back. "Not for us, for you." Silence stretched thick enough to taste. I let it sit there. Sometimes silence is the loudest move you can make. Marcus finally looked at me. "You think this saves you?" "This," I said softly. "This isn't the win. This is just the moment you realize you're going to lose." I could see the calculation flicker in his eyes, the mental inventory of emails, Slack messages, side deals. He knew the retention protocol meant there was no rewriting the past. The board would see it exactly as it happened, and no amount of spin would save him. He was the crack in the dam. I was here to break the whole thing open, but how much of myself would go with it when it finally burst? The meeting wrapped without handshakes. Robert gathered the papers, Elaine closed her laptop, and Marcus sat there staring at the table, as if he could will it to swallow him whole. Out in the hallway, Robert said quietly, "We're not done." "No," I said. "We're just getting started." I had been carrying the same black moleskin notebook since my first year at Aldrin and Pierce. Inside it were pages of clean bullet points, ink smudges from red-eye flights. and one line I'd written the day Marcus first tried to corner me. They never expect you to keep receipts. Today that notebook wasn't in my bag. It was sitting on the table in front of Mrs. Whitaker, open to the page with dates, names, and vendor ledger notes that matched the Slack screenshots perfectly. Robert's voice was steady as he walked the board through the payment irregularities. Every freeze, every unexplained temporary variance in the vendor accounts. He didn't embellish, he didn't need to. The Slack message from Marcus to his procurement contact instructing them to hold a legitimate payment to push a competitor into breach was projected on the screen in quiet, damning text. Marcus leaned back, arms crossed, like he still believed posture was power. Elaine watched him with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome. The boardroom was silent except for Robert's measured explanations, the kind that leave no room for narrative spin. Mrs. Whitaker closed the notebook with one hand, the sound sharp in the quiet. Marcus, you're suspended effective immediately pending formal investigation. Her voice was even, but her eyes didn't leave mine. Elaine glanced at me. That's one move, she said, and it wasn't encouragement, it was acknowledgement. Marcus stood, but not before catching my expression. I gave him nothing, no gloating, no satisfaction. Just the same look I'd given him the day he walked into my office with that smug threat months ago. The notebook was back in my hands before the meeting adjourned. I slid the pen into the spine, thinking of the first line on that page, and how this suspension wasn't the headline I was after. It was just the preface. Because the real reason I'd spent months gathering every clause, every archive, every grain of proof, wasn't sitting at this table. Not yet. I had spent weeks weaving the threads tight enough that Marcus Brecht couldn't see the trap, even as he stepped right into it. By the time the quarterly compliance review landed on the board's agenda, every missing document, every lapsed license, every delayed customs clearance had a single name on the approval chain, his. That morning, I walked into the boardroom early. Agnes Meyer, the board secretary, was already there quietly arranging her files. She gave me one of those small nods that told me she'd noticed the pattern. She always noticed. The others trickled in: Robert Kessler with his ever-present leather folio, Elaine Moritz, scanning her phone, her jaw tight. And then Marcus, late as usual, Lena Vogel following 2 steps behind with a laptop. She looked terrified to open. I took my seat at the far end, letting the distance make me invisible until the moment I wanted to be seen. Elaine didn't waste time. We've got a $2 million loss attributed to customs delays, she said, flatly sliding a stack of reports across the table toward Marcus. Explain. Marcus leaned back, spreading his hands like a man rehearsed in plausible deniability. Temporary backlog. The assistant handling renewals. He gestured vaguely toward Lena. I didn't give him the chance to finish. The assistant who was assigned without training, despite repeated warnings from compliance, I said, keeping my tone level. Warnings. I sent directly to your inbox, Marcus. Robert Kessler flipped open his folio. We also have 3 separate reminders from Customs Officer David Kruger, all unanswered. If those had been acted on, we wouldn't be here. Marcus's smirk faltered. He reached for the reports, but Elaine kept her hand on them. These documents show your sign-off on every stage of the process. That's not backlog. That's negligence. The air in the room shifted. Agnes Meyer was taking notes, her pen moving steadily each stroke, a record that would find its way into the official minutes. I slid a printed copy of my email chain down the table. Every one of these flagged the risk before it happened. Each was acknowledged by your account, Marcus. For the first time since he'd been appointed EU Division Director, he didn't have a quick retort. He looked at Lena, then back at the table, but nobody was coming to his rescue. Elaine leaned back, folding her arms. Robert, prepare the motion for an internal review of Mr. Brecht's conduct, effective immediately. That was my first payoff, watching the man who dismissed my 22 years at Nordax's transport group get pinned under the weight of his own arrogance. But the real motive wasn't just to see him fall. It was to make sure he could never undo what I had built. As the discussion moved on to next steps, I let my gaze drop to the silver pen in my pocket, the one Ethan had given me before leaving for Boston. For when you sign your last big deal, he'd said, I realized I'd been saving it not for a deal, but for a signature that ended something far bigger. When the meeting adjourned, Marcus gathered his papers with slow, stiff movements. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. He knew exactly who had put the nails in the coffin. In the hallway, Agnes caught up to me. That was surgical, she murmured, not breaking stride. I didn't answer right away. My mind was already moving to the final step, the one no one in that room would see coming. The The part that would make sure my name and not his would be the one the company remembered when the dust settled. And that's the thing about revenge in corporate corridors. The public moments sting, but it's the private, irreversible shifts that truly end someone's reign. The boardroom was quiet enough to hear the tick of the wall clock. David Morrell sat at the head of the table, flanked by the same executives who once nodded along to Ethan Ward's every word. But this time, their eyes stayed on me. The final audit report lay between us, my highlights still visible. Clause 14.3, vendor exclusivity breach. Clause 9.1, false compliance certification. I didn't need to explain them again. They'd already spent a week with the evidence. Ethan walked in, late jaw set, silver pen in hand, like it could still sign his way out of anything. He didn't look at me. He looked at the board, like they were supposed to remember who had saved them 2 years ago. David cleared his throat. We've reviewed the findings. Effective immediately, Ethan Ward's contract is terminated for cause. No vote, no debate, just that. The pen stopped spinning. For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty on his face. They didn't stop there. The board approved notifying the SEC and terminating the vendor contracts he'd pushed through without compliance review. It would hit the trade publications by morning, quietly worded, but devastating to anyone reading between the lines. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt steady. This wasn't adrenaline. This was a closing of accounts. The silver pen caught the light again as Ethan pushed back from the table. He placed it neatly, almost carefully on top of the audit report, then walked out without a word. It wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. I stayed behind as the others filed out. My copy of the vendor contract sat in front of me, corners worn from weeks of carrying it everywhere. A reminder of what they tried to take and how close they came. I folded it once, slid it into my bag. It had done its job. By the end of the week, his name was scrubbed from the leadership page. The vendor deals were unwound. Procurement sent a memo reminding all managers of compliance review protocols, word for word, the same language I'd written 3 years earlier. Nobody mentioned my name, but everyone knew where it came from. The cost? I'm not naive. The company took a reputational hit. The team had to pick up the slack, and I had to burn bridges I once thought I'd cross again. But I can live with that. Because here's the truth. I hadn't said out loud. Until now, I didn't just want him gone. I wanted every shortcut, every favor-traded contract, every whispered threat to carry a consequence. I wanted the next golden boy to think twice before cutting compliance out of the process. The silver pen stayed in that boardroom drawer, probably forgotten. I didn't take it. I didn't need a trophy. My win was seeing my rules printed on every new vendor onboarding checklist. People ask if I'd do it again. My answer never changes, not for revenge, but for accountability. In the end, those two things just happened to line up. I walked out that night into the chill air, no crowd, no applause. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd left the place better than I found it. The rest, that's theirs to carry. If you've ever been in that position watching someone untouchable finally face consequences, you know it's not about the noise. It's about the silence afterward when you realize you've reclaimed something you thought was gone for good. So, what would you have done? Would you have let it go? Or would you have seen it through knowing the cost? Share your story. I read everyone, and if you want more real corporate justice like this, subscribe and stick around. These stories matter because they're ours.